What is the most fricked up thing that your job required you to do? Worked at an airline. They wanted me to pass the passengers' live animals through a 20-plus-year-old X-ray machine to look for drugs without even letting the passenger know what was going on. The animal would die from radiation months after, so blood wouldn't be on the airline's hands. I quit that crap and called their central HQ. Got my bosses fired and the procedure eliminated. It was awesome. Heck yeah, you are a hero. When I worked at GameStop, take trade-ins from junkies who snatched them out of the hands of their crying children. Ever watch a little boy cry over losing his entire GBADS collection because his mom wanted them? I have. I remember doing this as well. I also can say it was the worst company I have ever worked for, but mostly due to the fact our regional manager was a douche. I worked at a vet and a really big dog had just died. In order to put it in the body bag I had to break its legs because the body had stiffened. Jesus. As a psychiatric aide in a mental hospital, I had to change diapers of geriatric patients. On my second day I was changing the diaper of one particularly spry woman. She was standing for the diaper change, and as I made a half-hearted towel wipe through her crotch, she pressed her crotch against my hand and told me to rub harder. Oh god, oh god, oh god. Hose out a pool full of crap. Quite literally, the pool holds approx 1 million liters, but it got drained for over winter, as it's an outdoor public pool, and there were other pools indoor. So, the one day the pool got drained of the water, but someone forgot to shut the drainage pipe back off after it was done. About a week later, the local council decides to backflush the sewer lines. And what do you know? There's now a crap bath in the pool, about 200,000 liters worth. No one was actually witness to the crap bath as it happened overnight, and by the next day it had drained back away, but this created a new problem. This next day happened to be a hot, sunny day which baked the crap residue onto the bottom and sides of the pool, as well as a 10,000 liter festering pond of crap still at the bottom of the pool. Now that morning you could smell a slight hint of butt in the air inside the building. But it was not until you went outside that you really got the full poo bat in the face and saw the monstrosity that lay in the pool. It looked like 1,000 Godzillas got hammered the night before and thought it would be a good idea to get a vindaloo curry, only to have the combination explode out their asses into the pool the next morning. Being the lucky person I am, I got to stand above the crap sauna for the rest of the day and hose it all back through the 4-inch pipe back to where it came from. Best TLDR ever. Back when I was the sports editor in town, I did a story on a young man who was really into rebuilding antique tractors. I met him when he was the hotspur on the football team and a state-ranked wrestler. I spent the Friday with him and his family at the local fair. I liked the boy and admired his work ethic, attention to detail, knowledge of his craft and articulate way of explaining everything. He was patient and considerate and just a good kid. I wrote the story over the weekend and was going to have it published the following Tuesday. On Monday, as I was walking out of the house, the police scanner went off, sending units to an accident scene. Since I was probably closest reporter to the scene and had my photographic equipment with me, I went as it was just a few miles away. I got to the accident and immediately recognized the boy's car. The emergency responders were just cracking the driver's door. I stood well out of the way, but knew it was bad. With the door open, I saw the steering wheel on the older car had imploded the boy's chest. 3 of his ribs could be seen under the wife beater he was wearing. Blood drained to the ground from his mouth as his body fell over. He still had on his lap belt and that's the only thing that held his body in the car. The responders knew the boy was dead and began recovering the body rather than rescuing an accident victim. They got him out and into the ambulance. Just as the ambulance was leaving, his parents drove up. They had heard that there was an accident on their road. Then they noticed the car. They asked if I knew anything. I told them I got there just moments before them and said I knew nothing except the ambulance just left. I kept a perfect poker face and ignorance in my voice. They left. I went home and cried. I got a letter from them a few weeks later thanking me for being there. Photoshop someone with Down syndrome out of a PR shot. I used to teach the dropout prevention students, most of whom were in gangs. One day there was a rumor that a rival gang member, also a student at my school, was going to shoot one of my students. I was required to keep the boy next to me, in my classroom, all day long while the gang unit searched for the weapon. This was because the school chose not to lock down because then it would have received bad press. Anyway, the boy was scared to death all day, and I was nervous as well. As it turns out, they found the gun after school in the bushes about 100 yards from my classroom. Frick that, I would walk the frick out if I was at risk of being shot. I used to clean operating rooms. One time I had to clean up after a cesarean section. The woman must have exploded, the operating table was dripping in gore and the floor was one big pool of blood. When I reached down with a cloth to start cleaning up the mess, the whole floor moved as one big clot. This other time I was cleaning the pathology room, the place where autopsies are performed. I was cleaning the stainless steel table when I noticed a big green garbage can under it. I pulled it out, looking for a bag to change. When I took off the lid, how nice, a bucket of human lungs. That was a hell of a job. The whole floor moved as one big clot. Great imagery. My story does not at all compare to yours, but my last position was assistant director of IT. At some point, the higher ups get it in their head to fire a bunch of people, and the night before, I was given a list. The next day I was made to escort people out of the building, giving them 15 minutes to pack up all the things they had collected over several decades of employment. Some of these people I had worked with for quite a while, and, in one case, I had also worked with one of their sons for a while. It was awkward, and there was a good deal of crying. The last person I escorted out was an elderly secretary who took the bus to work. Because she had boxes of her stuff, she called for a ride rather than trying to bring the stuff on the bus. I was told to make sure she waited outside in the heat. She was not allowed to wait in the lobby of the building. Did some of these people deserve to get canned because of poor performance? Sure, but they could have been treated a bit more humanly, and, seeing as how I was in IT and not security, I feel like I should not have been put in that position. I was a reporter for a weekly paper in a small town. A kid just drowned in a dugout, and I knew that if I showed a bit of sensitivity, I could get all the family comments and info I needed for the next paper, a week away. However, the daily paper of the neighboring city, which was owned by the same chain, was pushing me to get everything that night so they could beat their competitor. They wanted me to harass the family at the hospital, read the envelopes in their mailbox to get names, etc. I gave them a decent story without harassing the family by talking to locals, emergency crews, etc. But it wasn't enough. They had one of their reports harass the family and get yelled at. Meanwhile, the family, happy with my tact, gave me a long, exclusive, heartfelt interview a few days later. Seeing that dead child helicoptered out of the dugout after a massive search still haunts me. Used to work for RBS UK Bank. In the lending center, one evening a guy called up asking for a couple grand loan to pay for his father's funeral. He had a terrible credit rating as his parents had done frick all planning for the future and ended up living with him, costing him a fortune as they had negligible pension. He couldn't afford even a basic funeral, and I had to sit and say computer says no like a dong. Tried taking it to the boss even though he clearly couldn't afford his current debt, let alone another loan repayment. Felt so sorry for the guy. Having a grown man cry down the phone at you out of desperation is a horrible thing. I worked at Abercrombie and jeans over size 6 were purposely placed on ceiling high shelves so that if someone wanted it they would have to ask an associate to get it for them. Because I worked as an in-store model, I wasn't allowed to leave the front, but I would page another store worker to come help the client. At that point, my associate would come ask me what was going on. I would explain the client needed a size 10 or whatever, and then my associate would go to the back room and lug out a huge ladder to reach the ceiling shelf for the size 10 jeans. Needless to say, this was humiliating to girls, and so most girls would try on the pants, and if they didn't fit they wouldn't ask for another pair. I think Abercrombie did this on purpose so no one over a size 6 could wear their pants without enduring embarrassment in the store. So I made the mistake of telling my husband about this thread. He says, put mine on there. Comb the area around the highway looking for a foot that had been detached from a homeless man who had been hit by a truck. Your husband is always asking me to do crazy stuff as well. Throw away perfectly edible pastries rather than hand them out to the homeless people on the corner. Way back in the day I managed a bagel shop and we would always have lots of bagels unsold at the end of the day. We gave them to a homeless shelter for a week. Then the shelter called and told us to stop because they were too hard, and most of the people had no teeth. Watch the CEO and upper management completely frick the company, and still go out and give those moral boosting all hands events while they are fricking the company. Scumbag CEO, we couldn't have done it without you. Lays off 30% of staff. We had a leak in our welding gas storage tank at the factory. This is not a wheel around tank for one guy. This is a 4,000 gallon pressurized mofo. One of two in the tank farm. Our sniffer told us that we had gas leaking. We could hear it coming around a gauge stem, but I could not get a clear reading on how much of the stuff there was. So I had to evacuate the plant, get people out of an adjacent building, notify the fire department, and call the tank company once everyone got to safety. And by everyone, I mean not me, because I had to go out to the potentially explosive tank and monitor the guy doing the repair for the next hour. Just weld the hole shut, shouldn't be a problem. Working at McDonald's, I had to clean a 15 feet crap streak all the way down the Playland slide. I work as a docent. We're not supposed to mention the Armenian genocide because Turkish people have been complaining. I'm Armenian. I can tell you that nothing upsets me more than hearing this. I can also imagine how frustrating it could be for you to have to withhold historic events. You have my respect for having to do that. I had to do CPR on and ventilate a 1-month-old infant. That's a crappy way to start your day. My job as a son required me to help bath my mother as she filled up with tumors. Towards the end of her life, her belly was so full of cancerous masses that she couldn't reach around to wipe herself. It was fricked up, to be sure, but in a different way than these other tasks. There was no indignation, only honor, but man was it a total mind frick. You're a hero and a god among men. I worked as a behavioral paraprofessional. Fancy term for special education teacher's aide, but since I was hired through a company rather than the school system I couldn't legally do much like defending myself or restraining violent kids. I was basically a glorified test grader babysitter for a bunch of special needs kids. I primarily worked with kids that had oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and there was a lot of bull involved. I had 2nd and 3rd graders that were completely illiterate and couldn't spell their own names. It really wasn't their fault. They came from broken homes, parents that were neglectful or abusive, and often came home to an empty house. They acted out to get attention and they would often get upset for very little reason. One kid dropped his pencil and made a noise, so the others would start doing the same thing right until one kid gets the idea to throw his desk at some kid that started it, and then they are all throwing chairs, desks, and trying to attack each other. There wasn't really much time to learn anything since they were all so emotionally crippled and had no respect for adults. Anything could set them off. Anyway, I dealt with that and got hit desks thrown at me for no benefits and $13 HR. My co-workers, teachers, would often belittle me in front of the kids, which would cause them to lose respect for me as an adult with authority, which made the problem worse. One threw a chair at me and hit me square in the stomach, nearly missing a pregnant teacher. And another time a 9-year-old boy got physically violent and started punching, biting, kicking me. We had no other means to deal with these kids than to call the guidance office and do the paperwork, in a rush, to get them shipped off on a bus to a special school, almost like a juvenile detention center, for the rest of the day. After that, I stayed the rest of the year and quit when the summer started. The kids actually really loved me and I got a lot of respect in my neighborhood for dealing with it. But since I didn't have any health insurance and I was at the age where starting a family was on my mind, I didn't want to make a career of it knowing that I could get seriously injured so easily. The most freaked up thing my job required me to do, the guidance office therapist locked me in a room with a very angry 9-year-old who was throwing chairs, desks, and trying to attack me. She needed somebody to watch him, knowing I wasn't allowed to physically stop him, while she did the paperwork to send him away to the special school for the rest of the day. Our walkie-talkies didn't work, so I couldn't radio for help when he ran around the room trying to look for weapons to cut me with, hurt himself with. Eventually she came out and saw what he was doing, tackled a kid and just sat on him until help arrived. As a mom of a 5th grader with odd, you're fricking son, I would not survive parenthood without our private therapy group that provides in-school support for our 3 kids. Ours are a little better off though because they're only there for our kids and the one-on-one support keeps them in a regular classroom. The behavioral disability classrooms are heck. I worked for T-Mobile as a customer service representative and I got a call from an unauthorized person trying to access an account of his wife. He had all of the required personal information, but since he wasn't listed on the account, I couldn't let him have access to the information. He told me his wife had been murdered and he needed some sort of information. I don't remember specifically what it was, but I remember it wasn't really sensitive information. As I was talking to him, I was googling his wife and found that he was telling the truth. Her body had been found just a couple hours prior to him calling us. Anyway, by law I wasn't allowed to give him any information. I discussed it with my boss, who basically said it was my call, but if that call was picked for evaluation, I could be fired if I gave out any information. The guy was crying so hard and was so frantic, I gave him the information he needed. Once, when I was an EMT, we got called to a cardiac arrest. When we got there, the victim had agonal respirations and a family member was in the room. After only checking her pulse, the medic called it. I know that we weren't going to get them back, but it felt all wrong. I tried to do CPR without the medic, but he told me to stop and it wasn't worth it. This was about 5 years ago and I still feel awful. I just keep thinking about the family member calling 911 only to have us do next to nothing. My husband has a heart condition and will probably not make it past 40. Here's hoping though, and this is my eternal nightmare, that I'll be the one making that call. You shouldn't feel guilty. You did something wonderful just by caring. Thank you. It's been another hard day in the ice cream factory, tasting ice cream. Literally cut the leg and arm bones out of 2 different deceased human bodies of people I personally knew. My supervisor required me to cut on these 2 people because he didn't like me. I did my job like a boss just to spite the prick. I once had to clean out the bins at the back of the cinema. It was summer and we had had a lot of customer over the past few days, so a lot of rubbish had collected. Being a cinema meant that there is a lot of coke thrown away. These are usually collected in black bags and chucked into the bins along with the rest of the rubbish. We'd been having trouble with a new supply of black bags, in that they weren't as strong as the old ones and had a tendency to break quite easily. As it turned out, a few bags had broken in the bin and spilled coke everywhere. It had been raining quite heavily for the last 2 days, and these bins were situated outside. I can only guess at the scenario here as I didn't witness it. What I imagine happened was that hundreds of wasps, firstly drawn in by the sweet smell of cola, got trapped in the bin. There was a slight hole in the top of the bin, and rainwater had filled up to a quarter of the bin, drowning the wasps. It was my job to clean the bins, and as I always had, I tipped the bin on its side to empty the smaller bags that were stuck to the base. Upon tilting it on its side, hundreds and hundreds of dead wasps covered the floor. It was then my job to dispose of these wasps. It was the weirdest thing I ever had to do in that cinema. Minimum wage, £5 an hour, was not enough for the stuff we had to put up with there. Dress up in women's clothing, shave clean, wear a wig while serving alcohol. I'm 6'2", 190 pounds, bearded, usually. I was once, at the age of 16, the only employee at a crappy cashier store for a week. Everyone had quit, one by one, until there was only me left. I literally had to skip school for a full week to open, run and close until my DM deemed it inappropriate to have me sleeping in the back room during the night instead of going home. She didn't think the whole skipping school thing was a problem because I lived on my own, therefore must be some sort of future dropout. When she finally let me hire on some work-hungry potheads, not only did she refuse to make me assistant manager, I had to train my new boss how to work a freaking cash register. Make sick money that paycheck, though. When I worked at Nordstrom, my boss asked me to skip class to work a sale. I told her I wasn't going to end up like her doing this in 10 years and never went to work again. Not me, but this has happened to a number of my friends. So on a sub you have pressurized tanks for all the wastewater and it is simply pumped overboard. So waste gets flushed into the tank, it accumulates, it's pumped into the ocean. Normally, however, on occasion people will decide to flush things that aren't waste. When someone does decide to flush a toothbrush or a disposable razor down, it can clog the filter to the pump inside that tank and nothing can be pumped out. So how do you clear it? You have someone suit up and get inside that tank. A few years back my buddy had to be the guy who cleared the pump, and seeing as the powers that be on our boat wanted to keep all the hazmat gear ready in the event that we had a coolant leak, he was given a small gas mask and that was it. So he had to climb into a tank filled to about his shoulders with a slurry of water, pee, and crap. Oh, and there aren't any lights. I think my favorite photo we took was him climbing out of the tank with a toothbrush in his hand, crap from the tank and his own vomit filling half his mask and his little Tyvek suit torn open. I always used to complain to the A-gangers about them venting the sand station when I was trying to sleep. My rack was right next to the sanitary blow station. I then stopped complaining after I saw one of them after they dived a sand tank. I work IQ and routine when we lose our patient. We have to take them to the morgue. So imagine spending 7 hours working on someone, dealing with multiple docs wanting multiple thing, drawing blood, assisting putting in lines only to have the patient die. Then you have to put them in the icebox. I always thought that was pretty fricked up. Try oncology. You deal with 7-year-olds who have no idea why they have cancer. You work with them for months. Get to know them, realize they have their whole lives ahead of them, administer horrific chemotherapy, and then in a week's time they go from recovering to dead. How the frick my mother could do this I will never know. When I used to work as a security guard, not being able to physically help people in dire need, you had to call the cops. Otherwise you are liable for lawsuits, being fired etc etc. I quickly learned that only working as a lone night watchman at an empty building property was the best position I could get, so I wouldn't be put in a horrible situation. I could go on and on about how crappy it was to be an observe and report type of security guard, the lowliest type of security guard, working for a national security guard agency that didn't care whether you live or died, but only cared about how you stayed out of trouble and how much money you made them and didn't cause a lawsuit. When I was in the Coast Guard, a third-class yeoman freaked out that the toner wasn't still in the cartridge. He told me to vacuum it out of the hopper, inside the copier, while still plugged in. I refused. He told the second class that the toner was supposed to still be in the cartridge, and that he'd told me to vacuum it out and that I'd refused. The second class then asked me why I'd refused, and I told her, not only was the toner supposed to be in the hopper, not the cartridge, but I outranked the other third class, thus didn't have to take orders from him at all, much less orders to do something stupid, expensive, and counterproductive. She ordered me to vacuum the toner out of the hopper. I refused, again explaining how the toner got there in the first place. She went and told the ensign that I was disobeying orders. Ensign, who didn't like me, stomped out and asked me why I was disobeying a direct order. I explained that I was not required to obey an order that was not valid, and then explained why the order was not valid. She then ordered me to vacuum the toner out of the hopper. I replied that I would do so, but under duress. I went and got the Electrolux, and began vacuuming the toner out of the hopper. Toner, being the fine stuff that it is, went right through the filter, got all over the carpet, coated pretty much everything in the office, then fried the electronics and wiring in the Electrolux, then popped the breaker. Right then, the master at arms walked in, flipped his crap over $110 worth of toner being wasted, then started yelling at me for wasting it. He started explaining how the toner works, how it gets from the cartridge into the hopper, and how stupid I was for doing something that stupid, wasteful, and counterproductive. Then he asked me why I did it. I explained the whole thing, from the third class, to the second class, to the ensign. I reiterated that I had agreed to vacuum the toner up only under duress, because the ensign was threatening to write me up for captain's mast for not obeying a direct order. He then flipped crap all over the rest of the admin office, starting with his protege, the third class, then chewing out the ensign. Once done, he stormed back out and ordered me to clean up the carpet. When I explained about the vacuum cleaner, he about had a stroke. He was about to write me up, but I reminded him that I'd only been following orders, and that, under duress, so he chewed me out for not taking responsibility for my actions. I freaking hated the military. Unload a trailer truck that had crates of busted bleach bottles in it in the middle of summer. When I was in high school I worked at a Fred's Dollar store as a stocker. Every Thursday we got new inventory and it was us youngins that got the duty of unloading it into the store. We would set up these rollers from inside the store and link them into the trailer. From there we'd grab it box by box and shove it down the rollers to someone waiting inside the store. On one occasion our shipment of bleach was all fricked up. They came in big boxes, 6 gallons to a box, and a whole pallet was busted and most of the bottles were leaking all over the trailer. One of the assistant managers demanded we still had to unload the truck even though it was full of bleach fumes and around 120 F inside. We tried to fight back but it was a either go home or get to work kinda thing. I attempted to unload the thing for about 10 minutes before it was just unbearable and I had to get out of the trailer or pass out. The assistant manager was furious. He jumped into the truck and started doing it himself. After about 15 minutes the boxes stopped rolling down the line to us and we see him crawling out of the trailer. He stood outside for a few minutes then collapsed. We called 911. He went to the hospital and we never saw him again. He didn't die, according to the head manager, but he never came back to that store. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.